Okay, we're all set.
All right.
All right, Paula, you can take it away whenever you feel like it.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Paula Rice, and I am the Senior Community Engagement Officer for Columbia University Medical Center, Taub Institute, and we are part of the neurology department and epidemiology, and we are working on studies, genetic studies for families and individuals and African Americans and Latinos, and for Alzheimer's disease. So the title of our presentation is Alzheimer's in African Americans, Disease Burden and Research Efforts. Okay, next. The burden of Alzheimer's disease in the population. So Alzheimer's disease is a disease of the brain that causes problems with memory, thinking, and behavior. It is a progressive disease that destroys brain cells and gets worse over time. So it is a neurological disease. It is not schizophrenia or bipolar. It's not a mental, it's not a mental health issue. It's a neurological disease where brain cells are being destroyed. So your brain is actually shrinking. Something physical is going on in the brain. In the US, more than 5 million people have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Unfortunately, there's no cure. And that's why, this work that we do is so important, because hopefully it will bring us closer to a cure. Treatments are available that can slow the progression and that can help patients maintain their quality of life as long as possible. Okay, so what is the difference between Alzheimer's disease and dementia? And I know that a lot of people confuse those two terms. Do not accept someone or a doctor or someone from the medical profession telling you that you have a little dementia. A lot of times we get dismissed because of aging. And as people get older, some people think that, oh, well, it's normal to have a little dementia. But you need to know what type of dementia. So Alzheimer's is a type of dementia. Dementia is an umbrella term, just like cancer is an umbrella term. And there are all different types of cancers. So there's different types of dementias. There's Alzheimer's dementia, which is the most common. There's vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, and frontotemporal dementia. And so that's why it's really important when a person starts showing signs of memory loss that they get the proper type of diagnosis so that it can be treated properly, so that the family needs to know what is causing this dementia and what type of dementia it is. Alzheimer's dementia is caused by a plaque on your brain that suffocates the brain cells and causes them to die. Vascular dementia, which is the second most common form, is caused by mini strokes. So, it's very, very important to get the proper type of diagnosis. All right, so what are some of the early signs and symptoms of memory loss? I think for me, I'm a former caregiver. I took care of a mother who had dementia. She actually had vascular dementia. And the first symptom that was recognizable by me was the repetition. She was repeating herself over. She would say the same thing over and over again. We'd have the same conversation over and over. She would have difficulty doing simple addition and subtraction. She couldn't manage her bills anymore. Another symptom is misplacing things or putting things in inappropriate places. not understanding space and time, or maybe even dressing inappropriately, like wearing winter clothes in the summer or summer clothes in the winter. And then just being depressed. Depression is a sign of early sign of dementia. And then you may also see changes in the person's personality. I mean, they might get irritable, they may get paranoid, they may lash out. Someone who was, very sweet and calm person might become very combative, or just the opposite. So, when, in disorientation, getting lost, a person who drives might just get lost, drive to another city or another vicinity somewhere, and just can't remember how to get home or get to a familiar spot. So these are all symptoms, and they can be very subtle in the beginning. So it's important to know what they are and make sure that they're addressed. All right, next. So there's basically two forms of Alzheimer's. There's late onset Alzheimer's that occurs after the age of 65. And then, so that's age related. And then there's early onset Alzheimer's that is a genetic form of Alzheimer's, and it can happen in someone as early as 40. So, and there is a test, a genetic test for that, for early onset dementia, but there's no genetic test for late onset. I mean, there is one, but it's not, it can't really guarantee that if you have the gene, that you're going to develop Alzheimer's. But in the early onset Alzheimer's, if you get a genetic test and they find that you do have the gene for early onset, they're like 99% positive that you will get the disease at a very early age. Next. All right, so Alzheimer's in African Americans. So African Americans are twice as likely to get Alzheimer's than whites. Next. And so what are the risk factors? Why are we at a higher risk? So it has been linked to diabetes. The risk factors are diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, and stroke. And unfortunately, African Americans have higher rates of these diseases. And it also is likely that a large part of the higher risk is due to genes. So there might be a genetic reason why we have higher rates of diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, and stroke, but we don't know what that is. And so, research is geared in that direction to try to find out the genetic determinants of these risk factors. All right, next. And then there's also, I mean, part of it can also be, and I think during COVID, we witnessed this, that some of the reasons are not just genetic, but they can be socioeconomic as well. Some of the reasons are access to quality healthcare in the community. Now, I don't know, I know that in New York, I mean, there were some areas in New York where there just weren't any hospitals anywhere near the communities where people were experiencing high rates of COVID. So there wasn't any hospital that they could get to easily. And there were lines wrapped around the blocks for admittance into the emergency room. Some people may not have access to health insurance. Or there could be a distrust in the medical system. Recently there's the Tuskegee experiment and there's Henrietta Lacks, and I don't know if you guys have heard that recently Ben Crump just helped the Lacks family get compensated for her genes. This just happened recently. I think the medical institution that used the genes, I think they kind of didn't feel as though, I mean, it was settled outside of court, but I think they kind of felt like they didn't do anything wrong. I was really surprised. So a lot of people, because of these attitudes, a lot of individuals in our community, they just have a distrust of the medical system altogether. So and then sometimes we don't have people that look like us, doctors that look like us to treat us. So that can cause us to not go to the doctor or to not have a doctor. And also we're underrepresented in medical research studies. And that's also important as well. So it's a double-edged sword. You know, we have a reason, there's reasons why there's mistrust, but we have to kind of get past that and participate in research. I think the best way to do it is to be educated and to advocate for yourself and ask questions about, you know, your health. Next slide. So Alzheimer's in African Americans. So a lot of times, because we aren't aware of the symptoms, the early symptoms, the very subtle symptoms, we're diagnosed at a later stage. And that sort of reduces the effectiveness of the treatments. Because the treatments that are on the market today really just they just slow down the progression of the disease. And the earlier you catch it, the more effective they are. But the later into the disease that you start treatment, it's not quite as effective. Next slide. All right, so a proper diagnosis. So, I mean, a person who, if you think an individual has some problems with their memory, their primary care doctor should really refer, that individual needs to be referred to a neurologist. All right, and that neurologist will will give a physical exam, take a medical history. Maybe there are other people, members of the family that have the disease or had problems with their cognition or memory loss. So that needs to be discussed with the doctor. And the person needs to have a neurological exam, like an MRI or PET scan, because for the vascular dementia, that's the only way that you can determine whether or not a person has had many strokes, is to have an MRI. So if a doctor's trying to determine what type of dementia a person has, you know, the neurologist really needs to be very thorough in terms of his or her testing. And then also cognitive tests need to be given, memory tests to test if the person has recall, because I mean, you know, we all forget things. But if you can remember it or recall it, that's a difference. That's like normal forgetting. When the person can never remember it, that could be a problem. So it's important to get a proper diagnosis. Next slide. Oh, and also in terms of the diagnosis, when they do give the test, a physical exam, they do blood work. And what they're doing with the blood work is they're ruling out there are other conditions that can cause a person to have memory loss. That's why it's really important to be, diagnosed or being referred to a doctor, because a condition that can cause memory loss is a thyroid disease, a low functioning thyroid. And a doctor can determine that on a blood test. If a person has a low functioning thyroid, that can be treated. And also a B12 deficiency. So a B12 deficiency is another condition that can cause a person to have memory issues. And that can be treated with injections of B12. So that's why it's really important to make sure you have a thorough examination. So when the neurologist is doing the blood testing and you don't have any thyroid, and the person doesn't have any thyroid issues, they've done the MRI, there's no stroke damage, and they've tested for your B12 levels. They'll, once they've ruled everything out, then they can say, well, this person might have, and still because there's no definitive test, this person might have dementia or Alzheimer's dementia. And so then they can treat it with drugs. So the most common drug that they use to treat dementia with is called Aricept. And then there's Exelon, and there's Razidine, and there's Namenda. And, sometimes if a person has a reaction to one of these drugs, it's best to try another. And I've heard people say that, oh, well, my mom, she took the Aricept, but it gave her diarrhea, and so it was just too much of a problem, and so we just stopped it altogether. So, and that's probably not a good idea, because Exelon comes in a patch, and you don't have to take it orally. And so, it's probably better to try some of the other drugs to see how well they're tolerated, as opposed to just, giving up altogether and not taking anything. Lecanemab is like one of the newer drugs that's on the market. It's very controversial. It's administered intravenously. It's for mild cognitive impairment, but one of the side effects, it was rushed through the FDA, and one of the side effects is that it causes bleeding on the brain. So I can't imagine why anyone would want to take a drug that has a side effect of bleeding on the brain. I mean, that's even worse than, that's just complicating the dementia even more. So it's very controversial, but I guess, and it's expensive. But I think the ones that have been on the market the longest, the Aricept, the Exelon, and the Razidine, and the Namenda, are probably the best drugs for treating the disease. And also, it's important. The reason I stress knowing what these drugs are is because a lot of times, because we wait too late to get a diagnosis, the person, in the later stages of the disease, the person may be presenting as like paranoid and being very agitated and having outbursts, and they'll be given psychotropic drugs to kind of like numb them and calm them down, when it's really not, schizophrenia or bipolar disease. It's really like a neurological issue. So a lot of times, in our community, the doctor will send you to a psychiatrist or a geriatric psychiatrist. And if the person is acting out or having outbursts, they'll prescribe Seroquel or some other type of psychotropic drug that really isn't appropriate if you're having a neurological issue. So those are the medications. All right, so lack of information about dementia is probably the most common challenge minorities face when getting this diagnosis. So as I said, really need to know. That having workshops like this is really important. Getting this information is really important, because if you don't recognize the symptoms, then like we mentioned earlier, you wait too long to get the diagnosis, or maybe you never get a diagnosis. The person ends up going into a nursing home, or some other a facility where maybe that could have all been prevented. So and then sometimes, like we mentioned there earlier, there's socioeconomic factors. So we can experience discrimination, within the medical establishment. And also we're less likely to be enrolled in cutting edge brain health research, or any type of research for that matter. I mean, the Black men are still dying at higher rates of prostate cancer. And what they're finding is that they do have blood tests out, or they're in the market to detect whether or not you're at an early stage of developing the disease or at a later stage. But Black males were never included in the research, and so the tests don't really apply to them. And it's not caught early enough, and they're still dying of cancer. So I mean, our community has got to get involved in research so that we know that these medications work for us as well. Next. All right, so I mean, basically this slide is just telling us that we're, Columbia is dedicated to trying to determine, why we have these risk factors and what is the genetic component of that. So studying our genes is very important nowadays. They're doing that, like, for example, they're doing a lot of genetic research with breast cancer. And so, with women, they're different. If you have certain genes, when you get diagnosed with breast cancer, they do genetic testing to see what types of genes do you have. Do you have that BRCA gene? African Americans tend to have higher rates of the BRCA. And if they know that, then they customize your chemo treatment. So we need to get to that place with Alzheimer's so that we know, what is the genetic incidence for us, so that we can come up with some type of medication or even just a treatment that will help us in the long run. Next. All right, so what are genes and why do we study them? And we sent some, hopefully, did you guys get the literature that we sent? Did you ever?
I think Diane received it, and I think she's going to be distributing afterwards.
Okay, great, because we have a lot of information in there that I think will be helpful in terms of, just follow up and just for your own, just to hold on to, for your own personal, knowledge and helping to spread the word in your communities. So we do have information on our genes, and, I didn't know this until I got involved in the study, that each person has about 20,000 genes. That is a lot. So, so to find these, to identify specific genes and variations of genes, it's like, and I think there's a slide. What's the next slide? I think there's a slide here that says, next slide. All right, next. Okay, I thought there was a slide that says, trying to find a particular gene that causes a risk factor is like looking for a needle in a haystack, because everybody has 20,000 genes. And so, trying to find a genetic link to Alzheimer's within African Americans is that's a big task. And what we're trying to do, as I mentioned with the cancer treatments, is that they're trying to get close to precision medicine, which means that it takes into account an individual's genes, and then comes up with a treatment that's specifically for them. And they're doing that now, as I mentioned, with, with breast cancer patients. They can put together, they study your genes. I mean, they'll give you a genetic test, blood test, and then they're able to put together a concoction or treatment, which could be a combination of radiation or chemo or whatever, but there's different types of chemo drugs. And they'll design something specifically for that individual. And I think that's where we're going in the future. So there won't be like a one size fits all medication where some people will have, side effects, or it's just not what they're calling a one size fits all approach, in which the disease is treated with the same drug in each person without considering differences in genes or their lifestyle. So we're heading in that direction with precision medicine. And I think it's really kind of exciting. And I just think it's good to know that, when you go to the doctor, they're going to look at your specific, your history and your medical makeup and your genetic makeup to come up with a medication to treat you. Next. Okay, so I talked about this earlier that, precision medicine exists in cancer therapy. So, and we want to get to that with Alzheimer's next. All right, so this will also be the future for Alzheimer's treatment, but we need to identify the genes first. And in order to be able to group patients into treatment, and we have to do it groups based on their genes. Oh, so here's the slide I was looking for. So finding the genes that cause a disease is like looking for a needle in a haystack. So we need a lot of people to be involved in studies and research because they need as large of a database as possible to try to identify one gene out of 20,000 genes that could possibly be a risk factor for this disease, for Alzheimer's disease. Okay, next. Okay, so the end of Alzheimer's start with you. And there is a critical need for African American study participants. And we really do need to know what it is. I mean, because, some people say, well, wow, why is it that African American, every time we talk about a disease, it's like we have higher rates of, something. It's always something where we have a higher rate, a disproportionate rate. But I mentioned to people that, for example, the sickle cell gene. So the sickle cell gene is a gene that prevents people in sub-Saharan climates in Africa from developing malaria. So it's something positive. It works to prevent you from getting a disease. But when you transport a group of people from sub-Saharan climate where it's very, very hot, and you send them to North America where it's cold, that gene doesn't work. It has no purpose anymore. So when certain environmental factors trigger it, it causes sickle cell. And so that sickle cell gene is the result of, people having a gene that protects against malaria. We don't get malaria in the United States, so we don't really need that. But like I said, when it gets triggered by other environmental factors, it can cause sickle cell. So, it's really important that we know what genes from our ancestry, can cause a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. So this is the first step to our therapy. Next. Okay, so we talked about this before, knowing the genes, knowing what genes can cause this disease, will help us to avoid the one-size-fits-all approach for medications, and it can help us deliver therapies that are tailored to an individual's genetic makeup, which is, of course, called personalized medicine or precision medicine. All right, so we have discovered more than 25 genes. So these genes tell us that inflammation, cholesterol, communication of brain cells, and accumulation of amyloid plaque in the brain are part of the cause of Alzheimer's. Next. All right, so the ABCA7 gene in African Americans. So this is a gene that has been identified and can double the risk for Alzheimer's in African Americans. So, we just need to continue on that path. This study that we are working on, well, one of the studies that we're working on is a study that spans 5 African countries, 5 universities in the United States, and also not just African Americans, but Hispanics of, African descent as well. So, we're looking and we're working, and there's a lot of, there's a family study that's being conducted that we've been working on at Columbia for years. So we're really, really dedicated to trying to find genes that, cause us to have a disproportionate risk. And hopefully, there's not even a test that a blood test that you can take to determine if you have or you're going to get dementia, like there is with, say, diabetes. If you want to find out if you have diabetes or not, the doctor can test your blood test, and there's a range. And if you're in the low end of the range, they'll say, well, you're okay, or you're pre-diabetic, watch your diet, exercise, and, and you can really kind of monitor whether or not you're going to get diabetes or not. But there's no test like that for Alzheimer's. So, having, conducting these studies and getting people to get involved in these studies can help us get closer to, even if not a cure, at least having a test to identify whether or not, somebody is going to get this disease. So what are some of the benefits of participating in research studies? As we mentioned earlier, knowing that treatments for Alzheimer's and other related dementias are specific to ethnicities. So there's financial compensation. You have an increased health-related knowledge, which is really important too, and the satisfaction of contributing to the greater good as it relates to finding a cure. All right, so we can send you, you can get a copy of this, or you filmed, did you copy this, this presentation? So you can scan this to get information. And next slide, you can contact us. This is our team. Our lead investigator is Christiane Reeds. Jenny is the project coordinator. I'm the community engagement officer, and Jeline is our research assistant. So we can all be, our contact information is on this slide. We can all be reached if anyone is interested in participating in a study or just getting some more information. And like I said, please read through the information that we sent you. I think it might be very helpful to you. And also, you can contact the Alzheimer's Association in your community. If you go on the website for the national office and insert your zip code, it will direct you to your to a office or chapter near you. And if you need to, they offer classes. So, you can, and most of them, as a result of COVID, most of them are, via Zoom now. So you can participate, you can check out what types of presentations they're making or workshops they're having, and just educate yourself. I mean, it's really important to get ahead of this disease, because once if it happens to you and you're not prepared, it can be so overwhelming. So so just, from time to time, if you would like, you can, like I said, check out whatever workshops that are available through the Alzheimer's Association, and just, be on top of it, stay informed. Most of the organizations do have social workers so that you can, contact them if you have an issue. But it's important as we age, and especially in our community, since we do have a higher risk, that we, that we stay informed about this disease.
Thank you so much, Paula, and thank you to the whole team. I know there's a few questions that are coming up. Missy said that someone is asking in the presentation room, are there any foods or exercise that can slow down the progression?
Well, I think one of the positives of knowing what the risk factors are, knowing that diabetes, hypertension, heart disease are risk factors in our community, we can work at monitoring those things. So like I said, make sure you know what your A1C levels are. Get that diabetes, get that test, know your numbers, and work with your doctor on your diet to keep those numbers down, because diabetes is a risk factor for the dementia, especially for a vascular dementia. And heart disease, of course, like exercise. The Alzheimer's Association recommends a Mediterranean diet, which is basically like fish and green vegetables and nuts and grains, so yeah, you may want to look up the Mediterranean diet, but diet and exercise is really, really important. And like I said, just staying on top of, your health, and knowing that cholesterol, so, getting your blood work and checking your cholesterol and keeping those levels down can, can be a great help.
Misty, were there any additional questions from the folks that are gathered there? And feel free to unmute yourself.
No, cousin, no one else has any questions at this time. We want to thank you all for your presentation for our family. And oh, I have a question. Hold on. What'd she say? I can't hear. Yeah, I can't hear you though. What did she say?
Does it run in the family?
Is cholesterol hereditary?
Oh, I think cholesterol has more to do with your lifestyle and what you eat, whether or not you exercise. So, but I mean, some people can, I guess, have a disease. So it can run in the family where people do have certain types of cholesterol that clogs their arteries. So, I mean, but you need to be on top of it. You need to know your cholesterol levels, and when you go to the doctor and get your physical, you need to make sure that they go through everything with you and you know what your cholesterol levels are and what adjustments you need to make to your diet.
Do you have any other non-pharmaceutical or holistic types of information that we should also pursue?
There is now, I don't know if the Alzheimer's Association used to have on their website a series of drugs, or not really drugs, herbs and things that you could take but this is all preventive, so you got to start doing this early. I don't know if they still have that or not, but I think you can go online and get that information. And just, there's a lot, and just keep in mind that there are a lot of studies out there. And, there's people always touting like, a cure for Alzheimer's or cure for, your memory or whatever. But you have to look at their research studies and how many people were involved in the study. So the NIH, it approves certain studies. They sanction certain studies, but that's because possibly there are over like 1,000 people in the study. Whereas some of these other studies that tout their drug or whatever, or their vitamins or whatever they have, they may have only had like 300 or 400 people in their study. And that's not a good and they did prove that they were able to prove their point that it works, but only with 300 people. And that's not a good representation of, of the world or our community, whatever. So you just have to do a little bit of research and look at the studies and find out how many people, if you can, how many people were actually enrolled in their study, and how extensive it was. So, but it's always, it's worth, I mean, if you can do something, if it's something holistic and it's a plant or something that God made, and but you have to do it it's like it's got to be, you can't just take it once you get it's not, the herbs don't work, they're preventive. So, you have to do this for a long period of time. You can't just take an herb and think it's going to cure you once the person gets dementia, So you've got prevention is like, diet, exercise, it's everything.
I see Misty walked off, but I just wanted to double check and make sure there weren't any last questions in the group. Let me see, there she goes.
Do we have any other questions? Oh, going once, going twice. No other questions, cuz we appreciate the presentation and all the knowledge.
Everybody's clapping, thank you.
Thank you for
You,
doing
Paula.
this.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you to the Columbia University team.
Yeah. No,
You're welcome.
no, thank you guys, and thank you to Erlene as well for like introducing you guys all. She's part of our study and she has been for many years, and she's amazing. It's like the family-based study that she's part of, and if anybody else wants other information on that and how you guys can participate with her, you can ask her. She knows a lot. She's very well informed. But thank you guys for giving us this opportunity to talk today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy your reunion.
Yes, enjoy.
you.
Have fun.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.